Sandwiched between the Atari 800 and the Atari 800 XL lies the Atari 1200 XL, the redheaded stepchild of the Atari 8-bit line. Let's take a look at it today. All right, in 1982, Commodore released the Commodore 64, a fantastic, amazing machine, iconic machine, that in many ways was at least at parity with the Atari 800, if not superior in other ways. And, if you just take a look at between the two different machines, you'll notice a very distinct difference in build quality, and cost. The Commodore 64 was released at a significantly lower price, much more affordable, and competing against the Atari 800 at the pricing that it had really didn't stand much of a chance. It was a fantastic machine, don't get me wrong. But if you had your choice, many folks chose the Commodore 64. And at this time, and unfortunately for Atari, their initial response was this guy, the Atari 1200 XL. It was announced at the end of 1982 and released in early 1983. It met the 64K specification that Commodore 64 had, and basically just carried over a lot of what you got from the Atari 800. There were some slight upgrades to the ROM, but in general, not much different. And in reality, in some instances, it actually lost some compatibility with the Atari 800 at that time, to the point where Atari even released a translator disk that would allow for you to actually load the Atari 800 operating system into memory for the Atari 800, or not 800 XL, 1200 XL, so that it could maintain some of the compatibility with the software from the Atari 800. All right, I only have one memory from back in the day, back in the 80s, about the Atari 1200 XL. And that was a conversation that my friend who introduced me to the 800 XL and I had. I remember he and I were just talking about whatever, computers at that point in time, and the Atari 1200 XL came up because we were just talking about, I would love to have this computer, that computer, this computer, that computer, etc. And I wanted anything because I didn't have anything at the time. And I wanted an 800 XL, and he said, I want a 1200 XL. And I said, well, what's a 1200 XL? Well, it's like the 800 XL, except it's bigger, and it's a 1200, so it has to be better. And that's basically the only memory I have of that. And to be fair, as I learned about it later on, the 1200 XL came first. Surprise, surprise, at least to me. Now, the 1200 XL, as you could tell, was slightly cost reduced versus the Atari 800. And it launched with a price that was lower than what the 800 was. When the 800 was being sold at list price. The 800 was tanked pretty heavily in price once the 1200 XL came out. The 1200 XL was listed initially at $899 per unit. Unfortunately for the Atari side, the Commodore, same amount of RAM, again, similar if not better technical specifications in many ways, was selling for $595. This was at list price now, have you? Pricing, it's easy to talk about pricing and say, well, this one is cheaper than that one. There was a price war that was going on, and pricing was changing extremely rapidly between the various different machines. And that delta would ebb and flow over time. Really, because of the nature of the Atari 1200 XL, it didn't last very long. The Atari 800 XL and 600 XL were launched, or at least announced to be launched, in the summer of 1983. Just a few months, 6-7 months after the 1200 XL entered in the marketplace. The 800 XL matched it pound for pound for basically the same specifications in a smaller and much cost-reduced package, allowing for it to more effectively compete with a Commodore 64 at that point in time. I've seen some analysis between comparing volumes of the Commodore 64 and the Atari 8-bit line of computers around this time. And numbers would suggest that the Commodore 64 in the year 1983 specifically sold in the realm of, 1.5 to 2 million units approximately. I've been able to tie that out with some annual report data that would suggest that from launch 1982 through 1984, they sold about 4.2 million units. So 1.5 to 2 million units sounds about right for 1983, and based upon some other data that suggested 2 million units were sold in that year. Okay, great. That same analysis that was done also suggested the Atari 8-bit line of computers sold 500,000 units. That is, by its very self, indicative of the dominance that the Commodore 64 had at this point in time. And unfortunately, the Atari 1200 XL didn't help that out. It would be interesting to have seen what might have happened had the Atari 800 XL been launched instead of the Atari 1200 XL, or if they'd accelerated it even a little bit earlier, right? And had responded and not let Commodore have almost 2 full holiday seasons to place these units out in the marketplace. The world might be a different place. It might have been a different place in the 80s, in the 1980s at least. I'm not saying that the numbers of 500,000 versus 2 million are rock solid numbers, but it's enough to paint the picture of approximately what the gap was in order volume or sales volume between the two units, or the two systems, really, because the Commodore 64 was a single computer. The Atari 8-bit line was a number of different computers, 400, 800, 600 XL, 800 XL, 1200 XL, between that same time period. All right, don't get me wrong here, but despite the fact that the Commodore 64 was an amazing computer, the Atari 8-bit line of computers, for what they were excellent. And in many ways, basically at parity with one another. Yes, there are differences. And yes, you can argue all day long until you're blue in the face, the Atari crowd versus the Commodore crowd. But all in all, they were both very comparable to each other. The big advantage that the Commodore had, again, was its price, and its price for a significant amount of time without an effective response from Atari. And the 1200 XL, not the best response. 800 XL was, which is why it was such a popular, it is the most popular of the Atari 8-bit line of computers, or most commonplace of all. Here we have the 1200 XL. We'll do a little walk around the computer itself. What's different about this versus the 800 XL? Well, obviously you can see the keyboard layout. The size differential is different. Additionally, the keyboard that you have here is very similar to one of the keyboards on the Atari 800. It is one of the Mylar ones. It can degrade over time, but has a great feel to it and types really nicely, as long as the Mylar's working. All right, so let's take a look at this guy. You have the lovely chrome and cream color aesthetic that you have, and brown, super 1980s design language for this that the XLs all had. So this is the debut of that design language. And what you have, keyboard, beautiful. On this side, it's fully blank, nothing on it. The majority of the ports are on the back. You got your SIO port, RF modulator out, monitor, channel changer for the RF modulator, power in. And the power in for the 1200 XL, it shares the same input requirements as the 800 and 400 before it did. On this side here, you have this very interesting cartridge port that actually is not compatible with all the cartridges. You'd have to either adapt this or adapt some of the cartridges that are different shaped in order to fit inside there. And the lovely little angled joystick ports. It's interesting. Atari really likes their angles. They did it this time, and obviously a power switch here. All right. now we're going to take this guy apart. Open it up. Total of 6 screws on the bottom. I love magnets. They're extremely helpful. All right, now what we're going to do is we'll open this guy up. And what you'll see here is in front we have the keyboard. Actually, well, let's turn this around so you can see how the keyboard connects to the motherboard. As you see here, we have this lovely guy here, and then this other one for the function keys. All right. Set that off to the side. Mylar underneath here. And if you've seen my Mylar repair for the Atari 800, the repair for the Atari 1200 XL is exactly the same. Using a hairdryer, peeling off the Mylar gently helps to refresh it. Leaves you from having to buy a new Mylar. That may or not be available. May or may not be available. All right, so what you see here, there's a capacitor here that was looking sorry, so I replaced it with this guy here. It's the same basic rating, except for this has a lot more temperature capability. Great, works wonderful. Additionally, one other change that I made to this is I also added an Atari, or UAV, Ultimate Atari Video. What this simply does is this cleans up both the composite signal as well as provides a better S-video output as well. All right, what you have is you've got your RAM here, your RAM chips. You have your 6502 CPU. You have your GTIA, your Antic chips for the graphics. They combine together. The GTIA is more of the graphics output, the interfaces with the output, and the Antic controls the missiles and sprites, and the missiles, I think is what they're called. Over here you have the Pokey chip, which also is the sound chip as well as controls the paddles, and then the PIA chip, which is the keyboard and joystick. Here you have your 2 ROMs as well, and other logic chips as well, as you can see. The neat thing is, again, this is something that Atari did a great job of, especially at least until the XE line of computers. Once they got to the XE line of computers, everything was pretty much soldered to the board, at least from those that I've seen. In the case of this guy and the 800XL, 600XL, most of the chips, the ICs, are socketed, which makes for maintenance of these boards extremely good, or easier. Now, right here, this little potentiometer, this controls the color output. And you can turn that, adjust it to adjust the color output to your screen to match up the, well, you can change it to whatever you want, but typically I think you want to adjust to Atari Blue. Back here you can also use the UAV, the Ultimate Atari Video, to adjust with this little potentiometer here as well. You can adjust the colors output as well. But that in a nutshell is, oh, you have your RF modulator, but in a nutshell, this isn't that super complex of a computer. It's awesome, fantastic, love it. All right, we have booted up, and this is the boot screen for an Atari 1200 XL. It's a simple Atari, beautiful rainbow. It's awesome. You then press the help button, and this looks awful familiar to those of you who have an Atari 800 XL, 600 XL, 65, 130XE, or even an XEGS, right? This self-test is the same self-test. So you can check your memory, do a memory test. Oh, actually, excuse me. You select to move around, start to test. Great, we're testing, 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 lovely. We're gonna exit out, select the audio visual. As you can hear it testing the voices. Beautiful. There we go. Can obviously test the keyboard as well. Lovely. And that's it. That is the Atari 1200 XL here. And we'll go to playing some games, doing some screen capture here. All right, so there you have it. The redheaded stepchild of the Atari 8-bit line of computers, the 1200 XL. It isn't as iconic as its predecessor, the Atari 800, with the crazy build quality, the chunk of metal on the inside, and the kind of old school style typewriter styling, 1970s styling. And it isn't quite as versatile as the Atari 800 XL, or as commonplace as the Atari 800 XL, which is by far, in my opinion, it is the best place to start for an Atari 8-bit computer if you wanted to collect one, the 800 XL. But what it does have a fantastic keyboard, an interesting design, and a fun little history behind it. And by the way, it wasn't produced for very long as well. All right, thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe if you like this video. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more of this kind of stuff. Have a fantastic day. Later.